On the 14th of May, 2006, two women crossed the Bergschrund at the foot of Mount Foraker's south face. Ahead of them lay 3 kilometers of a route that had been climbed just 7 times in 30 years. Every one of those times, it was a pair of men. You can't come down the same line. The only way out is up, over the summit. 19 days later, in the avalanche cone at the base of the face, Sue Nott's backpack was found, the buckles intact, the waist belt unfastened. In the lid pocket, a radio. The tracks of 2 people can be followed upward to 16,600 feet. They end there. Sue Nott and Karen McNeill, Foraker, the Infinite Spur. Susan Nott grew up in Vail, Colorado, a town that lives on snow. The mountains are part of daily life there. Work and transport depend on them, and free time is spent on them. Even the exact year of her birth is hard to pin down. Some sources say 1969, others 1970. And that is far from the last discrepancy in her story. As a teenager, she raced downhill. She looked for the straight line down and tried to take it faster than anyone else. Decisions there have to be made at speed, and there is almost no time left to fix them. Nott was good at that. She got used to a mountain that answers instantly. In 1989, at 20, she picked up ice tools for the first time. The new sport ran by different rules. On ice, hurrying is dangerous. It takes patience, a precise swing, and the ability to read frozen water. It can hold your weight, or it can shatter after one wrong move. Instead of a few dozen seconds of descent, Nott got a climb that lasted hours, where every meter is earned on its own. In her very first year, she led the Fong, Vail's famous ice pillar, graded WI 6+. It is one of the hardest ice lines in the area, a free-hanging column that people usually approach after 5 to 7 years of steady training. Nott had a single season behind her. The leader climbs with no rope from above and places the screws as she goes. A mistake gets answered immediately. Ice climbing quickly pushed ordinary life aside. For a few years, Nott tried to combine university, running, and a normal biography. It didn't work. By the middle of the 90s, she had given up on schedules for good and was living the way many professional climbers of that generation lived, season to season, one wall to the next, with almost nothing to her name and plenty of free time. Her family stayed in Colorado, her mother and 2 sisters. Over the years that followed, they would learn about her routes from rare phone calls out of base camps. Weeks could pass between those calls, and for the family, that silence slowly became a normal part of every climb. From then on, her calendar was set by the map of North America. Nott went through the Yosemite School, where American climbers learn big walls and long days. Then she went further north and stayed the winter in Valdez. Hundreds of ice lines freeze up around that port town in southern Alaska every winter. In Valdez, she found a line of her own. The first ascent was named Glass Onion and graded WI 5-. Far from the hardest ice of her career, but a different kind of experience. On somebody else's route, you at least know the way exists. On a new one, you don't know that until the last meter. Next address, the Canadian Rockies, where the continent's ice climbing community gathers every winter. Nott took on the serious lines of the region. Acid Howl on Mount Stanley in British Columbia, and the Replicant on Mount Rundle in Alberta. In those mountains, that second line is the one people measure themselves against. In the winter of 1998, she was struck by falling ice. The danger comes from above. A frozen waterfall is changing all the time. Temperature, sun, and the blows of whoever is climbing higher all work on it. Sometimes a piece the size of a refrigerator breaks off the wall. Nott suffered a serious injury and spent about 2 months recovering. A hit like that usually changes a career. The climber lowers the bar, moves to a safer discipline, or at the very least stops leading. Nott came back to the same grades, in the same style, and went back out in front of the rope. Her partner would later put it more precisely. When everything on a route turns bad, it is easy to find 1,000 reasons to go down, and very hard to find one to keep climbing. Nott, he said, always found that one. That sounds like an unqualified compliment. High up in the cold, with a tired head, the ability to keep going is rare. Only that kind of persistence has another side to it. The question of where its limits lay would come up again later. While Nott was building experience on American ice, her future partner was growing up on the other side of the planet. Karen McNeill came from Taihape, a small town among sheep farms and low hills in the middle of New Zealand's North Island. The real mountains are far away, several hours on the road to the Southern Alps. There is almost nothing on record about McNeil's early years. Sources don't even give an exact date of birth. Memorial pages carry only the years, 1969 to 2006. That pattern would hold. By her results, McNeill should have been highly visible, yet she almost always stayed in the background. In 1994, she left for North America and never moved back for good. New Zealand remained home, but her whole adult climbing life now happened on the other side of the Pacific. Friends called her Curly. The nickname stuck and stayed with her to the end of her career. For 4 years, she worked as an instructor at a women's ice climbing school in Colorado. The school rested on a simple idea. Women learn faster when there are no men around to ask for help. McNeill set her own rules for her students and held to them strictly. No apologizing on the route. No, sorry, I fell. No, sorry, I'm slow. To McNeill, an apology like that meant the student was already writing herself off. She shut that habit down on the spot. After coming down, a student had to name one thing she had done well. Most people go through their mistakes readily enough on their own. McNeill asked them to talk about what had worked. The last rule she backed up physically. On the way down, she would stop a student half a meter off the ground and hold her there on the rope until she said out loud, "I am strong." Until those words came, she didn't let go. McNeill knew where that hardness came from. When she was young, there were no women climbers around to look at and think, "I'm allowed to do this too." Now she was that example for her students, and she was doing it on purpose. Later, she settled in Canmore, Alberta, right at the gateway to the Rockies, and worked as a school teacher for several years. How an ordinary teaching job turned into first ascents on remote walls, the record doesn't explain. Between the quiet life in Canmore and her first big expedition, there is a gap. Nott and McNeill met at an ice climbing competition in the States. In the late 90s, that scene drew a narrow circle of people who were serious about winter terrain. The exact year and place of the meeting are unknown. They shared one idea: to climb as a pair, a women's rope team. In the climbing world of that time, that was rare. Most strong women climbers worked in mixed teams, and out of habit, the technically hard sections usually went to the man. Nott and McNeill turned that arrangement down. Their first expedition together took them to Peru, to a mountain called Tauliraju. The year is given differently in different places. Some sources say 1998, others 1999. Next came Shivling in the Indian Garhwal, a summit climbers call one of the most beautiful in the Himalaya. They climbed the West Ridge in roughly 5 days. That takes more than a few strong moves. It takes a shared pace, matching decisions, and trust over a long route. They chose alpine style, and behind that neutral term sits a hard practice. You carry everything, food and fuel, the tent, the rest of the gear. There are no intermediate camps, no fixed ropes, nobody hauling supplies up ahead of you. A siege expedition builds a whole infrastructure on the mountain and can retreat down it like a staircase. An alpine-style pair moves up in one single push. With every day, the way back grows longer than the way forward. You can only climb like that if you are sure of your own speed and of your partner. There is nothing to make up for an error in the math. There is no food dump 2,000 meters below. After Shivling, a chance meeting at a competition turned into a standing partnership, one already planned out for the next several years. By then, both had support from Mountain Hardware. People had noticed them. 2 women climbing serious routes together in a demanding alpine style. Then, for several years, their paths split sharply. For nearly 3 years after Shivling, each of them did her own kind of climbing. The directions they picked were almost opposite. McNeill chose places where there was hardly anyone. She was drawn to walls with no cues, no detailed descriptions, no ready answers. In 2001, she put up a new line on the south face of Illimani, the Bolivian 6,000er hanging over La Paz. The route, around 1.5 kilometers long, was named Nada es Seguro, which means nothing is guaranteed. As far as the record shows, it was the first female ascent of the south face of Illimani. In 2002, she was working on Mount Huntington in Alaska. In 2004, she made a first ascent on Cerro dos Cuernos in the Patagonian Mariano Moreno Range, an area only a handful of people reach. In Greenland, she opened 3 new routes. The details and the years of those climbs aren't recorded anywhere at all. With the New Zealander Pat Deavol, she climbed a new line on Xiaxue in China's Sichuan province in 4 days. Again, the year comes up differently, 2004 or 2005. The picture that emerges is strange. The routes exist, the partners remember them, and there is almost no connected public biography. Nott, meanwhile, was heading for the most famous faces in the world. She wintered in Chamonix, at the foot of Mont Blanc, to climb the classic north faces of the Alps. She did the Crow's Spur on the Grandes Jorasses, the north face of the Dreux, and a line called Scotch on the Rocks. In 2003, she became the first American woman to climb the 1938 route on the north face of the Eiger in winter. Something close to half of European climbing mythology grew up around that wall. The difference between them now wasn't in level, it was in fame. Everyone knows the Eiger, almost nobody knows Xiaxue. Nott was being compared to Lynn Hill, and one comparison like that is enough to put you in the top tier. McNeil's results were comparable, and she had even more first ascents, but outside a narrow circle she was barely known at all. Pat Deavol would sum it up later in a single line. New Zealand's most successful climbing export never received the recognition her achievements deserved. For several years, one career unfolded in public and the other almost in silence. In 2004, Nott and McNeel climbed together again and chose a route that would put both of them in the spotlight. They met on Denali, the highest point in North America. Their route, the Cassin Ridge, runs almost straight up the south face and gains about 2,700 meters. The Italians made the first ascent in 1961. Ever since, it has been one of the benchmarks of difficulty on Denali. Climbing one hard section well isn't enough here. A team has to hold its speed and its precision for days on end. On the 2nd of June, 2004, Nott and McNeel reached the summit. They became the only all-female rope team to climb the Cassin Ridge in its entire history. Other teams were sitting out the weather in camp, while Nott and McNeel kept moving. That was their usual method. This time, the limits of it showed up in simple arithmetic. They left base camp with 5 days of food and 7 days of fuel. Even for a fast team, that leaves almost no reserve on a long route. The weather slowed them more than they expected. Day 5 went by, then day 7. On the 10th day, they didn't show up at the camp at 14,000 feet on the West Buttress, where people were waiting for them. The National Park Service raised the alarm and started a search and rescue operation. A high-altitude helicopter found them fairly quickly, in a tent on the summit of Denali, both alive, both unhurt, just very hungry. There had been no accident, the climb had taken longer, and they had stretched what was left of their supplies over twice the planned time. That time, it ended well. The climbing community took note of a Cassin ascent in bad weather, and of how Nott and McNeel had rationed the last of their supplies over several extra days. The Park Service drew a conclusion of its own. This team can be given more time than the numbers on paper allow. The Rangers remembered that. Those two can be given time. 2 years later, that reputation would shape how the timing of their return was judged. A year on, Nott came back to the same range and took a close look at the mountain next door. In 2005, she climbed the Talkeetna Ridge, Foraker's southeast ridge. The south side of the mountain is clearly visible from that ridge, and Nott studied its terrain up close, not in photographs. Foraker stands right beside Denali and is permanently lost in its shadow. 5,304 meters, 6th highest in North America. Tourists tend to look at the neighbor. The mountain's native name is Sultana. Within a small circle, though, the route on its south side is very well known, the Infinite Spur. The name is quite literal. The line runs from the glacier to the summit for roughly 9,000 feet, and there isn't one proper ledge on the whole thing. Nowhere to pitch a real tent and calmly wait things out. Bivouac spots have to be chopped out of snow and ice wherever the terrain allows. In 1977, Michael Kennedy and George Lowe made the first ascent in 8 days, climbing more than 80 pitches. The route wasn't repeated for another 12 years. In 2001, Steve House and Rolando Garibaldi went up it in 25 hours, then spent another 20 coming down. For most people, that kind of speed stays out of reach. After House and Garibaldi's record, the route went unclimbed for several years. Every attempt between 2002 and 2005 ended in retreat. What defines the Infinite Spur isn't its technical grade, it is the geometry of the line. Rappelling would demand too many anchors on a line that is too long and too exposed. So climbers finish upward over the summit and only then descend a different ridge on the far side of the mountain. Because of that geometry, the decision to keep going carries a different weight. On an ordinary wall, you can turn around at almost any moment. Here, past a certain height, that option is gone. What is left is to finish over the summit. There is no safe way back down off the face. Nott saw that line from the neighboring ridge in 2005. By March of the following year, the decision was made. On the 13th of March, 2006, they filed their application with the Denali National Park Service. In the box for the team name, they wrote, Turtle Team. The name explains their tactics well. A turtle moves slowly, carries its house on its back, and still gets where it is going. The Kasan taught them to build in a margin of time and give up on racing. They didn't need House and Garibaldi's 25 hours. They intended to take as long as it took. They planned to descend the Sultana Ridge over the summit of Mount Crosson, on the far side of the mountain and well away from where they'd started. There is no other sensible way off. With that plan, the approach and the way back never overlap anywhere. On the 19th of April, Nott checked in at the ranger station in Talkeetna, the small Alaskan town where the planes carry climbers out to the glaciers. On the 23rd of April, she flew into the Kahiltna Glacier. From that day, her preparation was happening inside the range itself, far from roads and far from any easy way to change the plan. The next month went into getting ready. On the 28th of April, Nott tried the deprivation route on Mount Hunter. And on the 7th of May, she climbed the Mini Moonflower on the same mountain. That was how she acclimatized, gained altitude, and checked her form. Both lines sit directly across from Foraker, so the main objective stayed in front of her the whole time. On the 9th of May, McNeel checked in at Talkeetna and flew into base camp. Only in hindsight does it stand out how different their preparation had been. In almost 3 weeks on the glacier, Nott had gained both altitude adaptation and a sense of the current state of the snow. McNeel had no such head start. You can't will your body into acclimatizing faster. It needs time to produce red blood cells, however good your fitness is. Between her arrival and the start of the climb, 3 days passed. On the 12th of May, they told the base camp manager they were heading for the Infinite Spur. By the usual rules, someone on the glacier has to know a team's route and its rough return date. Before they left, they were issued a radio. There would be no other contact with base during the climb. They declared 14 days of food, though other figures turn up in the sources, 10 days or 12. Their fuel, most likely, was 8 to 10 gas canisters of 8 ounces each. Reaching the start of the route takes several days of walking. The way runs up the Kahiltna Glacier and its southwest fork, then over a first pass, along the upper fork of the Lacuna Glacier, and over a second pass. Only from there can you get to the base of the face. On the second pass, they left a cache: skis, part of their gear, 2 full gas canisters, and about 4 days of food. To a climber, that decision looks ordinary and sensible. Hauling weight you only need on the way back up a 3-kilometer face means losing speed. So, the extra gets left on the pass to be picked up on the return. And this is exactly where the ordinary logic of an approach runs into the geometry of the Infinite Spur. The second pass lies off to the side of the entire return route. There is only one way to reach the reserve left there, to turn back along the same path, before ever starting up the face. After the cache, the arithmetic quietly shifted. The 14 days of food declared at base camp became roughly 10 days on the wall. The 2 spare canisters could have given another 3 or 4 days of water, but they stayed on the pass. Several kilometers and 1,500 vertical meters separated them from the place where they would be needed. At the time, the numbers didn't look alarming. Strong teams do the route in a week, so 10 days ought to be enough even at turtle pace. Sensible, as long as the rest of the gear stayed with them. On the 14th of May, around 8 in the morning, they were seen at the Bergschrund at the base of the route. A Bergschrund is the crevasse that separates the glacier from the start of the face, the natural border between approach and climb. Up to that point, you can still turn around and walk out along your own tracks. Past it, the Infinite Spur itself begins. At the Bergschrund, they were spotted by Will Mayo and Maxime Turgeon. That Canadian-American pair was putting up a new line on the same south face in those very days. A few hundred meters separated the two teams, and each was busy with its own route. That is the last confirmed sighting of them. The morning conditions were perfectly workable. Average weather, moderate snowfall, no strong wind. Weather data would later confirm that there was no sharp deterioration during the first week either. Time and food were still sufficient, and both women were in good shape. The start looked ordinary. The radio never worked, not once. Not a single transmission was ever logged. At base camp, the silence didn't worry anyone yet. A small handheld radio doesn't punch through a mountain range. The signal travels in a straight line, and between the face of Foraker and base camp lie kilometers of rock and ice. Contact usually only comes on the ridge or at the summit, once nothing is blocking the way anymore. For a team on a wall, no signal is normal. The expected return date was the 28th of May, 14 days from the start. Once they were on the route, the story almost stops being a sequence of events. There is no report of an emergency and no distress signal. Silence. Over the next 2 weeks, base camp received no data at all. Down below, nobody knew what altitude they were at, whether they were still climbing or standing still. 2 women were on a 3-kilometer face, and on either side, there wasn't a scrap of new information. In climbing, that kind of silence is familiar. On a self-contained route, a team inevitably goes out of contact. It comes with the style they chose. Signs of a possible emergency appeared late, at a point when the options for a rescue may already have narrowed. On the 21st of May, the face was checked from the air for the first time. The route was flown by Mark Westman, who had climbed the Infinite Spur 2 years earlier. He knew the terrain from the inside and understood where on the line a team's tracks might have survived. To an unfamiliar observer, a white face has almost no landmarks. Westman could read it couloir by couloir, ice rib by ice rib. He saw tracks on the approach and at the Bergschrund crossing. Above that, nothing. That still didn't confirm any alarm. On steep terrain, tracks live for a few hours. Snow and wind wipe them off the ice quickly. By day 7, the absence of prints proves nothing. Westman simply came back with no new information, but there was still the arithmetic, and weather doesn't interfere with that. 1 8-ounce gas canister lasts a team roughly a day and a half to 2 days. 8 to 10 canisters, in ideal conditions, give 12 to 20 days. 2 full canisters, though, were lying on the second pass, out of reach. Without the cache, the fuel had to run out somewhere between the 25th and the 29th of May. At altitude, fuel means water above all. Snow has to be melted. There is no other source of liquid on a 3-kilometer face. Dehydration quickly cuts both physical and mental performance. The calculated date for the food to run out under a 14-day plan was the 28th of May, the same week, and around the 25th of May, wind moved in over the Alaska Range. Not a short gust, but a strong, steady wind that held for about 6 days, until the 29th or 30th of May. On exposed terrain, a team has to stop completely. You can't move, and you can't put up a tent. All that is left is to dig into the snow and wait. For Nott and McNeill, that was day 12 to day 15 on the route. That halt used up almost everything they had left in reserve. At 5,000 meters, with no radio contact and no way down, a team has almost no room left to change anything. Down below at that moment, nobody knew. After the wind, the face was surveyed again. On the 29th and 30th of May, the route was flown twice, first in a fixed-wing plane, then in a helicopter that climbed along the wall to its ceiling. No movement, no tent, not even a patch of color on the snow. The exit from the route and the descent ridges were clear as well. The mountain looked empty. On the 31st of May, the National Park Service began discussing whether to declare an official search. 20 years later, the decision looks obvious. At the time, the hesitation made complete sense. The pair had deliberately chosen slow tactics and called themselves the Turtle Team, so the route could easily have taken 12 to 15 days. The 31st of May was day 17. Formally, being overdue didn't look critical yet. Then people remembered the precedent on the Cassin Ridge. For the Park Service, it meant that the planned schedule could run out before this team's strength did. A full-scale helicopter search on a 5,000-meter peak is dangerous for the crew and takes serious resources, and there remained a real chance that Nott and McNeill were still on the route, and that stepping in would be premature. The weather offered one more explanation for the delay. Taken together, those arguments push back the start of the search. On the 1st of June, at 5 in the afternoon, the decision was made to begin searching. That same evening, the high-altitude helicopter flew twice. It ran along the Infinite Spur and the Sultana Ridge, where the women should have come out on the descent. At around 14,000 feet, on the section called Knife Edge Ridge, the crew spotted something that looked like tracks. In 18 days, that was the first sign. It still proved nothing, but it couldn't be ignored. 18 days had gone by since Mayo and Turgeon saw them at the Bergschrund. On the 2nd of June, the search opened up in earnest, with 4 flights in a single day. The crew worked its way methodically up the face from below. The first find came not high up, but almost down at ground level. About 100 yards east of the start of the route lies an avalanche cone. Over a season, everything that comes down the face with the snow collects there at the base. On that cone, they spotted a backpack. About 100 yards from the backpack lay a sleeping bag in the same blue and black. A little later, in the same cone, a red fleece jacket was found. The pack was lifted out with the helicopter's hydraulic grabs. It was identified. It was Nott's. From that point, the condition of the gear became the only document available. The crew and the Rangers went over the pack detail by detail, and everything understood about events afterward rested on that work. The main compartment was empty, but the foam pad was still strapped to the outside. The hip belt was open, the shoulder straps loose, the fabric undamaged. The pack clearly had not come down the face attached to anyone. That is not how a pack looks after a fall together with its owner. At the moment it went, it was standing on its own and was not rigged for carrying. Most likely it happened in a fairly ordinary way. The pack fell, or was blown, off a bivouac ledge at around 11,500 feet, at the start of the ice rib section, where teams chop out their first bivouacs. While its owner was busy, it was sitting on the snow. A gust of wind or one clumsy movement was enough to send it down the face. Later, the same cone would give up a fleece hat, a glove, a small yellow stuff sack, and a pink windbreaker. The most important find was in the lid pocket. Along with the pack, they had lost their only radio. Judging by the estimated height of the fall, this happened at the very beginning of the route, on the 2nd or 3rd day out of 14. After that, they had no way to pass anything on to base camp. The finds at the base explain something about the first days. The rest of the story now had to be looked for on the face itself, section by section. The area was divided into segments, and each one examined separately. The aerial search took 27 flight hours. The crews shot hundreds of photographs. Back on the ground, the images were enlarged and compared, coming back to the same slopes from different angles. In flight, a human track on snow is almost impossible to make out, but in a photograph, it can still be seen. And tracks were found. A double line of tracks was confirmed between 15,500 and 15,800 feet in the area of the exit gullies. Through those gullies, the route leaves the steep part of the face. The next line appears higher up, at 16,400 feet. One more pair of prints lies 200 feet above that. It is on the gentle slope beneath the false south summit. Beyond that point, the trail ends. The false south summit reaches 16,812 feet. From there, it is still about a mile along the ridge to the true summit of Foraker. On the summit plateau, on the approach to the main summit, and on the descent routes there are no prints either. The Sultana Ridge, the Talkeetna Ridge, and the French Ridge are all clear. Those photographs give one firm conclusion, but they don't answer the main question. Most likely, they climbed the entire technical part of the Infinite Spur. The face the whole thing had been about was already behind them. The last double line of tracks confirms it. Both women were alive and still moving upward. Whether they reached the summit, the photographs don't show. From the last tracks, it is 200 feet to the false summit. The women could have covered that, and the snow could have hidden the prints within a few hours. To the main summit, the way is longer still. After that mark, the timeline has a gap. It has never been filled. Another flight might have helped, but from the 7th of June, the weather shut down flying almost entirely. For a full week, no aircraft could get up to the upper part of the mountain. On the 11th of June, the search was wound down. By that day, 28 days had passed since the last sighting. Any reserves would have been long gone by then. Surviving that length of time at 5,000 meters, with no fuel and no communication, lies beyond the known limits of the human body. The search was ended because there was no longer hope of finding the women alive. On the 15th of June, a helicopter reached 14,500 feet and picked up the cache from the second pass. Everything was still in it: the skis, part of the gear, 2 full gas canisters, about 4 days of food. That untouched reserve would have covered another 3 or 4 days of water and food. But from the route there was no way to get to it. The cache, made in the name of speed, came back to base camp intact. On the 9th and 10th of July, the area was flown one last time. The search for the women was over by then. The crew hoped to spot equipment, or any object at all that might help reconstruct what happened above the last line of tracks. Nothing was found. At that altitude, a helicopter works right at its limit. Thin air cuts the lift, the wind near the ridges shifts unpredictably, and there are no places to land. The park leadership judged any further risk to the crew unacceptable and closed the operation for good. Neither Sue Nott nor Karen McNeill was found. The glaciers of the Alaska Range sometimes give things back years or even decades later as they melt out of the ice. In the 2 decades since June of 2006, there have been no new finds on Foraker. Both went missing on the mountain. Their whereabouts remain unknown. Once the search was over, what remained was to gather the known information into a single document. The final report was written by Ranger Meg Perdue, who had taken part in the operation. The editors published it without cuts, so that the full scope of the work would be visible. Instead of a connected narrative, the report offers a test of hypotheses. One by one, it works through the possible events above 16,600 feet and sets aside the versions that don't hold up. A simultaneous fall by both was considered and was not supported. The search team found none of the traces such an event would leave, either on the face or at its base, and the avalanche cones had been examined carefully. An avalanche was also deemed unlikely. The slope beneath the false summit is too gentle for that. A fall into a crevasse was likewise considered and rejected. The photographs show no break in the snow cover and no line of tracks ending at an opening. The idea that the women might have lost their footing on the ridge because of the wind was deemed unlikely. The explanation that remained went into the title of the report. During the 6-day storm, the pair may have sheltered in a snow cave somewhere near the south summit. That is what people usually do when a tent can't be pitched. According to this hypothesis, the women were unable to leave the shelter. The weightiest detail had been known since the 2nd of June. One sleeping bag had gone down the face, along with the backpack. Between the two of them, 1 bag and 1 pad were left. In a storm lasting days, the entrance to a snow cave fills in quickly, and after that, the shelter can no longer be spotted from outside. But that is only the most likely version. There is no direct evidence for it. In one place, the report corrects the press outright. Newspapers wrote about 300 meters to the summit, but the search data doesn't support that. The last tracks were significantly lower. After it came out, climbers argued for a long time about fast and light and about the line of reasonable risk when supplies are cut to a minimum. No shared answer ever appeared. Too much weight slows a team down and can also increase risk. Too little leaves no margin for delays. Many wouldn't presume to judge the decisions of such an experienced team, because in their place they would most likely have done the same. The people who knew them personally, meanwhile, were gathering to say goodbye. On the 18th of June, 2006, around 1,000 people came to a memorial gathering in Vail. On the 20th of June, another 200 or so met in Canmore, where McNeel had lived. For professional climbing, a world measured in a few hundred surnames, those are enormous numbers. The first memorial appeared on the mountain itself, and nobody had planned it that way. That same neighboring pair, Will Mayo and Maxime Turgeon, successfully completed their new route on the south face of Foraker. They named the line the McNeel Nott Memorial Route. Mayo and Turgeon climbed it on the 12th through the 14th of May, 2006. In those very days, Nott and McNeill were crossing the passes and starting up their own line. 2 teams working on one mountain, a few hundred meters apart. One came down and gave its route a name. What became of the other is not known. In 2007, the American Alpine Club and Mountain Hardware established the McNeel Nott Award. The grants go to small women's teams climbing new routes in remote areas with light kit. That is exactly how Nott and McNeill had worked all their lives. The money goes to people who are still little known, and that kind of support was always the thing McNeill herself lacked. The ice climbing school in Colorado, where she spent 4 years teaching women not to apologize on the route, set up a separate scholarship in her memory. The McNeel Nott Award is still given out today. For almost 20 years, women's teams have been receiving grants for first ascents under those 2 names. Many of them learn the story behind the names only after they've applied. Their own story, though, was left without an ending. The search never showed what happened after the last tracks below the false south summit. Nobody knows whether Sue Nott and Karen McNeill reached the summit of Foraker.